Okay. Hi, John. How are you?
Hello, Douglas. I am excellent.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming on our show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Let's see. You're an author and
Mm.
a teacher. What do you teach?
Well, I have taught in the past freshman composition and writing and some creative writing. So now I dedicate all of my days just to writing. So,
Okay. You were a retired teacher?
well, um, I have
Semi-retired?
retired from teaching. Yes,
Okay.
yes, and so I kind of had a circuitous journey toward teaching. So I was in the um, industry. I was in business for many years. Wanted to get out of it. Wanted to become, I'd always had a hankering for writing. Dabbled in it, and I made my break from the corporate world around 2000, the year 2000. Gosh, it seems like a long time ago now. Seems like yesterday.
I
And
know.
I started doing freelance work. I got my master's degree and was able to teach. I got a teaching gig at a university as an adjunct, and I did that for a number of years. It was a lot of fun, getting back with students in a different environment. Um, but my passion was to write, and so um, as I was completing this book, The Road to Delano, it was so overwhelming that I was able to take a break from teaching and finished the book and started marketing it. And I never went back to teaching. Now I'm just writing books. So I've enjoyed all aspects of it, but right now, writing and marketing books is is what I've been doing.
How many books have you written?
Well, I when I made the break from the corporate world, I started. I didn't have any published books, but I was a pretty decent writer, and a friend of mine who was a ghostwriter helped me get into that business. So I've ghostwritten probably over a dozen books, all
Oh,
kinds of
wow.
books, memoirs, biographies. Biography was by far the most challenging book I've ever written. Um, uh, Books, nonfiction books. Right now, for clients, I focus on writing memoirs, and I've gotten pretty good at it. I've gotten one on the bestseller list, and that's it. It's a craft. And writing memoirs and writing fiction are, I would say, are kissing cousins. They're so close together. They're so related in the technique and style that publishers want and readers want today. So I fell into a good gig. So right now I'm writing fiction and finishing up a memoir for a client, and novels. This is my second novel on my own name. Yeah.
You know,
Wrote
it's
the thing.
interesting. It's interesting that you say that writing a memoir and writing a fiction is like kissing cousins because presumably someone's memoir is not fiction.
Well, okay. I'm talking about the technique, Douglas. I'm
The
talking about
technique.
the
Okay.
technique. Okay.
Okay.
So if you think of reading a novel, when you go and move over to a memoir, you want to see some of that same technique. You want to see scenes. You want to see a little bit of drama. You don't want it to be droll and dry. Um, and a memoir is a slice of life. It's a moment in time in a person's life, very much like a novel. And so um, that said, the research that goes into a novel and what I've learned over the course of doing this is taking so much from real life. So writing someone's real life um, and researching real life and turning it into fiction, they are the backsides of the same page. The technique is exactly the same. Um, Now, when I get stuck in someone's memoir, I don't make it up like you do in a novel. I call the client and we talk.
Okay.
I get
Yeah.
more information. It's the same thing you would do when you write a novel. You get stuck in a situation. You get stuck. What do? You do some research, and you look at what other writers have done. You read a little bit of history. Since I write historical type stuff, I go to the research. I go to the used bookstore, read more, and then the character comes to me, or I figure out what to do. So it's the same methodology. You just go to, my character. When you write a memoir for someone, they've got it all in their head, okay,
Right.
or maybe they have it in their notes or their diaries, and so they are my research subject, and I'm very good at getting out of them, the essence of their story. And much like a novelist ekes out, a story out of characters that are not wholly fictional, particularly in this book we're talking about today.
Okay, well, that's a good segue. Your book is called Road to, is it Delano
Delano.
or
Delano. It's a small town in central California, farming town, yes.
okay, that's not the same as Franklin Roosevelt's middle name.
No, this town was founded in the 1880s. It was named for the Secretary of the Interior at the time. And so when the Southern Pacific or Central Pacific was building out the spine of their railroads coming down the central, coming down central California through the Central Valley, they would stop and create a city. And all those little towns were started by the railroads and or farmers, who relied on the railroads. So there was a lot of a lot of those towns are named after politicians and people in the 1880s who sponsored the railroad, that type of stuff.
Okay, because when I first saw the title, I thought, oh, this is a book about FDR.
No,
But
no,
no.
it, no, no, it's not. But you know what
Okay.
it is about, right?
Why don't you tell us?
Okay, excellent segue. Thank you. So I had actually been teaching when I came across this idea, and um, profess they allowed us to pick out of a number of books. When you teach freshman writing, you have to do essays. You probably remember that. Um,
Yeah.
so they allowed us to take a selection. There's a selection of books here. You have your students read them, and then teach the art of essay writing out of them. And one of them was the history of civil disobedience, which I thought was, might be interesting to students, disobedience. And so we read these essays. They started with Socrates, drinking the hemlock and
Right.
refusing to succumb to the pressure of his elders. And we ended with Cesar Chavez.
Huh.
And
Okay.
Cesar Chavez and MLK. Okay, we all know MLK used nonviolence as a form of civil disobedience. Um, I I'm a lifelong Californian, and I just did not know. I knew about the grape strikes led by Cesar Chavez. I did not know about the um, the philosophical and moral underpinnings of what he did to accomplish something that organizers had been trying to do for 100 years in the Central Valley, and that is form a farm workers reunion run by farm workers for the benefit of the farm workers. To so in the 60s, Cesar Chavez was a organizer, a community organizer, helping people get out to vote and um, you know, finding resources in the community. And as a former field worker, he grew up in the migrant community, although he was not. And in those days, the migrants were American citizens. Just want to make that very clear. He was born and bred American,
Okay.
and all the workers were American at that time. There was very little of what we have today. Um, so they had atrocious working conditions, atrocious pay, and they were at the mercy of the growers. So um, I had always been influenced by the Grapes of Wrath. I knew about that end of the story, but I didn't know it was still going on in the '60s. But it was totally different. Well, different in degree, in that Cesar Chavez, as a devout Catholic, decided that the only way to break the power of the growers and to get them to sit down with them to negotiate, the growers would not even sit at the same table with the field workers to talk about the working conditions and wages. So it was an intractable situation. They had the upper hand, they had the power. And so he led this strike along with Larry Idalong and Dolores Huerta. And it was based on the principle of nonviolence. So whenever violence broke out, and it always broke out from the growers, he taught his people not to react. And that was the methodology the growers had used all through the early century, that they would foment the violence, the strikers would retaliate, and then the police would sweep in and arrest the strikers, not the growers. Okay, they had no power, they had no one backing them. So he knew that this was a vicious cycle, and that he was very influenced by Catholic theology, um, obviously by Gandhi. And Gandhi had been influenced by the early Christian martyrs who used nonviolence to um, as a form of civil disobedience against the Roman emperors and the laws outlawing Christianity. So this has very deep roots, the same roots that Martin Luther King used in nonviolence, and um, and it was a hard struggle. And in the middle of it, his people, his followers, were getting very upset. They were getting beaten. They were getting abused. They were getting run off the roads when they would try to go from camp to camp. It was a really bad situation. And some of the young men said, we're going to go get our rifles and we're just going to start shooting. If they come at us, we're going to come at them. And Cesar Chavez wisely knew that if that came about, the 3 years that they'd suffered in this strike would all just vanish, because the police would swoop in and just scoop up the strikers and push them off to another, and say you have to either leave the valley or go somewhere else or go to jail.
Right.
So it was an intractable situation. So he went and he started a fast for nonviolence. Now it's a fast, Douglas, not a hunger strike. So in a hunger strike, an incarcerated person or someone who's in a weak position will strike to get the authorities to pay attention to them. Well, if it was a hunger strike, the growers would have said, don't eat food forever. We hope you die. And they were hoping he would die and expecting he would die. And but this was a fast for nonviolence. It was to motivate his people. He's saying, I'm fully committed to this. You need to be fully committed to this. And we are the poor. We're not going away. We'll always be here. And we have all the time in the world. Okay? We just have to sacrifice this time to strike, and we're not going to use violence. And it worked. He turned things around. And 2 years later, they signed. So my story takes place during that 28-day strike. When I read about that 28-day, fast for nonviolence, I I'm teaching kids, and I thought, well, what are the high school kids thinking about all this? I mean, they're trying to go to school, get an education, move on with their life, and this whole town is being torn apart, between, the growers who don't want to even talk to the field workers, and the field workers who just want them to sit down and talk and negotiate, wages and working conditions, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the genesis of my story, The Road to Delano. So um, Cesar Chavez chose Delano as a place to begin his program for justice for the strike field work, because surrounding it were these vast grapevines, and they need to be cared for year round. So it's not really a migrant workforce. The workforce had to settle in, live there year round to take care of the vines. And then obviously during the harvest season, more migrant workers. So they weren't really what we would call migrant workers. They were field workers, and some of them had worked these farms for years. And the working conditions were horrible. And when the migrant workers did come in, the living conditions were even worse. So that's the genesis of my story.
Okay. Well, on that, we do have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we just kind of blew right through our
I'm
time.
sorry.
No, that's okay. That's why we're here. We wanted to hear you talk and tell us about your book. The book is called Road to Delano. My guest is John DeSimone. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Absolutely. JohnDeSimone.com, but you can find the book on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. You can order it anywhere. I know bookstores aren't open all the time right now, but indie, you can find it at any of your independent bookstores. Order it anywhere.
Thank you for coming on